One of the most human things that we can do is show gratitude to the divine. The Christian thing to do is to listen with an open and a loving heart. Hi everyone, Angelo here, and it's the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time. So last week, I would have spoken on dialogue and knowing our own story. And this week, I believe we're taken even further with that. And I think this time it gets deeper into this idea of identity. So we're still in chapter 6 of John, and we're continuing with what's known as the Bread of Life discourse. And we have the people complaining to each other about Jesus, talking about this controversial statement that he says, that where he said, I am the bread of life that came down from heaven. And they're saying, but this is Jesus, the son of Joseph. We know his father and his mother, we know his family. How he could say, I come from heaven. And then Jesus jumps in and continues on what he was saying last week, and talking about his relationship with God the Father and him himself being God the Son, if even necessarily not in those words. And then we have, coming down to the end, these famous lines where, at least how it's written here, is the last 4 sentences, where he says, I am the living bread which has come down from heaven. Anyone who eats this bread will live forever, and the bread that I shall give is my flesh for the life of the world. I remember when I was in grad school. So part of the degree was we had to do a year of ministerial training and formation. And my professor, this was Dr. Elsie Miranda, she would often use stories or poems to introduce the class, to start us off with the class. And then we'd have like a little discussion period. So I remember this one particular time, she made us look at this story that dealt with identity. And by the end of it, when we're breaking everything down, she comes so profound. She was like, you are not the sums of the things that you do. You are not your successes and you're not your failures. You are not your thoughts and you're not your habits. You are a beloved child of God. And that changed my whole perspective. And of course, as many of us would know, Ari Nowen has a lot to speak on being beloved, this identity of us as beloved, loved by God. So we have the people here complaining to one another about Jesus' identity. And it goes to show, like I would have started saying last week, how important dialogue with our stories are. Because we are defined by our stories, and we definitely are not our stories, but our stories inform our understanding of life and God and life in God. And since we are defined by our stories, defining others by their perspective, or rather our perspective of their stories, isn't the Christian thing to do. The Christian thing to do is to listen with an open and a loving heart. That same love that Christ would have been speaking to the crowds with here today. So when Jesus tells us his story, when Jesus is telling the story to these people here, it's difficult for us to accept. Because it means trusting in a God of this radical, unconditional love. Or it means believing in a God that loves and welcomes all of us, regardless of what we might consider to be flaws. It means understanding that we are what we eat, and if we are consuming Christ himself, if we believe we are consuming Christ himself, then our identities then become assumed in Christ. Because, at least in my religious imagination, if God the Father and God the Son love each other forever through God the Spirit, then God is drawing us into this love to then be loved. And besides being a privilege, is our responsibility, since Genesis, to care for all of creation and to bring all of everything in with us, as the way God would intend. So to me, Jesus' identity as the bread of life and our identity as beloved means that one of the most human things that we can do is show gratitude to the divine. And we show gratitude by imitating that love as best as we can, however we can, because for me it will look different to you, it will look different to the next person. We all have an ability to do it in different ways. And not everybody might necessarily be able to feel the love of God directly, because not necessarily everybody may believe that they can approach God and have a relationship with God. However, everybody can experience the love that we can show to one another, especially us as Christians, showing love, especially to the ones who believe they are least loved. This bread of life that Jesus is talking about, this bread of life that Christ is saying we eat, is the life of the world. We then become that same life force, that same energy. This bread of life, it brings us to oneness, because we're not meant to be divided, whether as individuals within our own selves, within our own psyches, or divided as communities. We have this one God, this one man, reconciling us with and to one another. And our identities come to oneness through Christ, which is different to homogeneity. But with Christ, there is very much unity in diversity. And even if we judge others as less than in our own understanding, God doesn't. God doesn't see anybody as less than. God still loves all of us the same regardless. So it would be good for us to remember too with that this God, this bread of life, first loves those who we consider to be less than. But as long as we come to this bread of life, as long as we enter into this divine love and we become what we eat, we then continue to spread that gracious love in and through all of creation. Anyway, that's it from me this week. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you.